a client audit that I did a couple weeks ago, they referred to their podcast as a webcast. Immediately, I was like, oh, I do not listen or watch webcasts. That feels dated to me. Whereas if it said podcast, I'm like, oh, I listen to podcasts and I'm interested in that.
It's just like, think about driving up to a restaurant versus a corner store. There are certain signals that let you know, oh, I need a restaurant and this is a restaurant. I need a gas station, this is a gas station. I need a deli and this is a deli. And you need that also on the web.
Welcome back to another podcast roast, where in every episode we dissect one of our listeners' show's packaging to help them improve their discoverability as well as their new listener acquisition. And today on the skewer, we have the show Cocktail College, which it appears like this is actually part of a pretty impressive network of alcohol-related shows and a kind of magazine-style website, which you actually have pulled up here. And so unlike our typical episode where we start off with the show listing, we are apparently switching it up here and going to start with the website. So I'm curious, what are you seeing as you look at the website that has caused you to bring it up here and start the roast in this area?
I mean, part of packaging and branding is the website. If I search for this podcast on Google, the first three results are their listing on Acast, Apple Podcasts, and then their website. And that means their website's in play as a place where, you know, the brand matters, the packaging matters. And the one thing I wanted to point out here is this happens to me all the time on websites. Someone says, you got to listen to the show. Sometimes they'll send me the website URL and then I get to there and then I'm like, okay, I want to, open this up in my podcast app, which is Pocket Casts. So I'm looking for badges for Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Pocket Cast. Don't see anything. Don't see any subscribe or follow or anywhere. The only button is this listen now button. And I click that. And where does it go? To Spotify. Now, this isn't terrible, but I would prefer that on your website, you're linking to a page like episodes.fm where they list out all of the different apps and then make it easy for people to click through and find there. So if I was them, if you're going to keep that single button right there, I would link that to a service like episodes.fm. But honestly, I would love to see the badges right here above the fold. Give me some options for where I can listen, where I can find the show.
Yeah. It is really nice to just have one button to direct people to from a call to action perspective. But depending on your listenership, I think there's this underrated and maybe underutilized aspect of putting the app badges is that it's legitimizing. If people see Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Google Podcasts was, then now that's being deprecated. But these brands that people know, they already trust those brands to some extent. And you could maybe make some arguments around, Apple and Spotify and some of the other platforms that are out there of like, how much do certain people trust those platforms? But they are recognized brands that, this is not like a scam or something like that. And I don't think that's something that people are actively thinking that, oh, I'm going to be scammed by like trying to listen to a podcast. But it does signal this kind of legitimacy. It's like when you have publications you've been featured in on your website, if you have that kind of Apple or Spotify or these recognized brands, there's this kind of like halo of legitimacy that extends to you. And so I think that alone is worth having those things there. And I also think that, a lot of people, especially for existing podcast listeners, they want to listen in their app. And so I think giving people the most common options up front and then maybe having a third button that is listen in your app that opens up episodes.fm is a smart way to go.
Yeah. The other thing it signals is that this is a podcast. The thing with this website right now is it does not immediately give me the vibe that this is a podcast.
Yep.
As opposed to, here's one of the shows I do. Well, all of the badges are right here. It's like, this feels like a podcast because listen on Apple, listen on Spotify, there's a signaling there that immediately lets me know, oh, I'm in the right place. I haven't found the Cocktail College blog. I've found the right place, and then just make it easy for me to open it up in my podcast player.
Yeah, and this came up in a client audit that I did a couple weeks ago where they referred to their podcast in some places on their website as a webcast, even though it was a podcast. And I was a little bit confused by this. And what was interesting is, as I was thinking about my reaction to this, when I saw the word webcast, personally, immediately I was like, oh, I do not listen or watch webcasts. That feels dated to me, and it's not something that I do. Whereas if it said podcast, I'm like, oh, I listen to podcasts and I'm interested in that. And so I think that that signaling is this other aspect where a lot of times we think about different parts of our marketing as doing one specific job, but sometimes there's a lot of stuff that goes into it where, yeah, on the surface, having a Apple or Spotify icon might be click here to go to Apple or Spotify, but it also is doing some other work in the background of just
Mhm.
helping us triangulate what is this thing that just popped up on our screen. And it does so in a split second. When we see those things, we're like, oh, these are associated with the kind of category of podcasts. And so now I know what I'm looking at. I know what I'm going to get if I click one of these links. It's not like an album, and with so much of like podcast cover art, it also could be just like music cover art and album art.
Mhm.
And so this kind of quickly says like, okay, this is a podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and we've got some of those kind of genre or platform conventions.
It's just like, think about driving up to a restaurant versus a corner store. There are certain signals that let you know, oh, I need a restaurant and this is a restaurant. I need a
Hmm.
gas station. This is a gas station. I need a deli and this is a deli. And you need that also on the web. And I'm a big fan of podcast websites. So the fact that they have a podcast website is getting a thumbs up for me. The fact that it's ranking well in Google search gets a thumbs up for me. But yeah, just a few little tweaks, get some badges on there, signal that this is a podcast. And then for the user, let them easily open it up in their favorite podcast app.
Speaking of podcast apps,
Yeah. If we open it up in Apple Podcasts, I think is lots to like here. The cover art itself, very well done.
yep.
It's like an illustration of different drinks. It has again, maybe a 70s or 60s kind of vibe. The title and typography is easy to read.
Hmm.
Anything else about the cover art?
Yeah, it feels kind of warm and quirky maybe to me, and also just kind of like fun. It has a feeling
Mhm.
like it doesn't feel like it's going to take itself too seriously or anything like that, but it feels legitimate. It's not like too loose. Like I think a lot of shows related to alcohol, and I think the classic is like the two guys drinking beer, talking about beer and whatever else.
Yeah.
There's some shows like that that are done really well, and there's a lot that are not. And so this feels tighter to me. And you also
Yeah.
see that there's this logo in the bottom right corner. And so this is the website we came from. They actually have multiple
Mhm.
shows related to different parts of the alcohol industry or different drinks. I think there was one on wine. There might have been one on beer. And then we've got this one on cocktails. And so this seems like to be a fairly legitimate, well-known brand. And if you look at their website homepage, which we didn't show here, but it is very magazine style. Like it feels
Mhm.
legitimate there as well. And so there are some of these indicators, even that logo in the bottom right corner of the podcast cover art that shows up in the app, but not on the website, that it looks like a tasteful logo. And so there's,
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of great signs here that make me think that this is going to be worth a closer look if I'm looking for a show like this.
The other thing that jumps out right away on Apple Podcasts is, wow, do they have a lot of reviews?
Hmm.
212 ratings from the US here. That's a lot of ratings.
Hmm.
That's a lot of social proof. If we scroll down and get some of the highlights, these are great. Love this podcast. Only trouble is it makes me thirsty. Have to save for Friday's pre-cocktail hour. I use this podcast for every drink I make at home. This is a cookbook you can listen to. Wow.
Ooh,
Like that
interesting.
you it doesn't like very descriptive immediately for a potential listener. It's like, "Oh, I know what I'm getting here." And we haven't even read the description yet. So, well done with getting ratings and reviews. And they really do help in the sense that when you're on Amazon and you're deciding if you're going to buy the product, you scroll down to reviews. If you're going to go to a restaurant, you scroll down to reviews. People are doing that in podcast apps as well.
So the other thing about the title and cover art combination here is I think that the title is really simple, Cocktail College,
Mhm.
but I think we'll get a little bit more from the description here. But based on that one review we read, it sounds like the title is telling you exactly what it is. It's probably teaching you
Mhm.
how to make drinks, how to make your favorite cocktails. And I think that you don't really need anything else other than Cocktail College, that one title. Of course, they potentially could add a tagline, maybe get some specifics related to, I mean, the trouble with alcohol is like, are you going to put all like whiskey and gin and like all the other drinks in there? Probably not. So I think in
Yeah.
this case, I would keep it simpler, but I mean, there is the option there to add some more kind of search discoverability.
Yeah, I actually love just how clean the title
Hmm.
is. If we read the description, want to take your bartending skills to the next level, that's like the first line. Right away, who is this for? It's for people who want to take their bartending skills to the next level, want to learn to make great cocktails. There's a job to be done right up front. You know what you're getting. And if I'm the kind of person who's like, man, I'd love to make better cocktails and I'm looking for a podcast about it, if I come here, I know I'm in the right place. So if they wanted to add to their title, they could say, Cocktail College, take your bartending skills to the next level.
Yeah.
But I actually love how clean it is.
Yeah.
Let me read the rest of the description. Join Vine Pair managing editor Tim Curdy for a weekly deep dive into classic cocktails with America's best bartenders. Cocktail College looks beyond the recipe and explores every aspect of mixology from ingredients and ice shaking techniques, garnishes, and glassware, elevating your martinis, mai tais, and everything in between.
I love that. It tells you everything that you need to know about this. I like the Cocktail College looks beyond the recipe to explore every aspect of mixology. So I like that. It kind of is like, okay, there's the ingredients, but there's also, what do you do with that? So that's it kind of expands a little bit there. I also like that they talk about how there's the weekly deep dive into classic cocktails with America's best bartenders. That's a great
Mm,
premise for the show. And so both we've got this kind of like how to do the cocktails, but we're also going to be learning both from somebody who is, I don't know this publication. This is my first exposure to it, VinePair, but maybe that has some cachet for listeners, maybe or maybe not. But we
hmm
also know, okay, so this is somebody who has some experience, but we're also going to be doing this with some of the best bartenders in America, which is this additional level of credibility and intrigue of like, okay, we're not just going to be learning from some guy, we're going to be learning from the best at the craft. So yeah, I think that this is really tight in terms of the show title, the promise of the show, the job to be done, everything feels really kind of crystallized around that.
Yeah. And with a drinking podcast, I think you and I need a taste test here. What if we click play on their most recent episode titled The Old Pal?
All right, let's do it.
Three, two, one.
Cocktail College is brought to you by George Dickel. Let me tell you a little story, listener. From the very beginning, as one of the oldest distilleries in Tennessee, George Dickel was determined to do things differently, rethink American whiskey using fresh spring water as well as tried and true distillation techniques. And here's why I'm excited to partner with Dickel today. Because whether you're talking Tennessee whiskey
Getting an
or
ad.
bourbon, Dickel actually puts both of those different types of spirits out there. You can argue the differences between yourselves. And when it comes to sipping, we're talking high age statements with some of the best value you can find in American whiskey. Seriously, we've been fans here at VinePair for years. We've championed Dickel for years, which is why it's so awesome to be partnering today. But this is a cocktail podcast, so let's talk about mixing options. I like to turn to the Dickel bourbon, which feels just as at home in those classic cocktails that we always cover here, as well as those
Did you
modern
are you still in
classics
the
we like
ad?
to get
I'm
into
still in the
as
ad.
well.
I'm a
Listen.
minute in, you're a minute in, and they've started with a host read ad. I understand why people need to do this. I understand the pre-roll is the most valuable spot in a podcast episode. The unfortunate thing is that when you're trying to sample a podcast, I just kept waiting, like, okay, when am I going to get a preview of the guest, Rachel Kling? When am I going to get a preview of like what is the old pal? I'm assuming that's a drink. Like, what can I
Mhm.
expect? And so I think monetization's great. I think it's good to monetize with ads, but as a first run experience, it's just not awesome.
Yeah, I think the production quality is really great, and this is a really, really good ad read, and so
Hmm.
he's doing a fantastic job here. He's kind of bringing some humor to it. He's really addressing the listener personally. You can tell this is not just a script that the company sent him to read. He's kind of scripted this himself, and he's tying it into the podcast as he starts to get into how would you use this drink? What kind of mixing, recommendations? I think that's really good for an ad, but what I would prefer to see would be open up with some kind of hook that he narrates, or maybe it's pulled from the episode or something like that. And he wins us
Hmm.
over, buys a bit of time where we're like, okay, I see what I'm going to get. I'm interested. I'm excited. And then maybe a couple minutes in after he's hooked us, he's bought some time for this ad to come in here. And so you can look at this a couple ways. And so on the one hand, you could make the argument that there is a listener service to be done by putting the ad right up front so they can just skip it easily, which,
Hmm.
depending on how you value your listeners versus your sponsors, maybe that's better, maybe that's worse. But personally, I think from a listener experience, and from a new listener acquisition perspective, I think I want to get some sampling of the show, some taste of it. Obviously, like there's something has been communicated about production quality and tone through the ad, even,
Hmm.
which is good. But yeah, personally, if I'm not quite sure if this is going to be the show for me, I would rather get to something that tells me a bit more about it immediately and then have the ad come in, even if it's just like a few minutes into the episode.
Me as well. And one way you could do this is, again, let's embody the listener. So we read that review that says, oh, I use this podcast Friday night, come home from work, I'm going to make a cocktail. I put this podcast on. So maybe I put it on my smart speaker and I'm in the kitchen. So that's the
Yep.
setting. So, the host could come on and say, happy Friday, folks. Today we are making the Old Pal. You're going to need 1 ounce of George Dickel, 1 ounce of this, 1 ounce of this. While you're getting all that ready, I'm going to tell you about our great friends over at George Dickel. So
Yeah.
now you've prepared me, you've set the scene, you've even prompted me. It's like, I see you there in the kitchen. I see you there after a busy week at work. I know we're getting ready to make a fabulous drink and help you to relax and ease into your weekend. And you've set it up really nicely.
Yeah. So the other thing that comes to mind is there are very few people and shows that I've come across where the ads are so good that they stand out to me as being really memorable. But Adam Grant from his show Work Life, he has done a phenomenal job. I don't listen to that show regularly, but when I have, there have been some really, really great ad reads. And what he has done in a lot of instances, and I've heard this on a handful of other shows, not very regularly, is basically start off the episode with a 10 or 15-second ad, maybe 20, 30 seconds, but it's the intro. It's almost like the ad is
Hmm.
actually a 2 or 3 part series that takes place throughout the episode. And he kind of teases what's going to happen in the mid roll. And the interesting thing that
Hmm.
he's done with some of his ads is it's actually been like 3 minute mid roll ads, which is super, super long. But they're this
Hmm.
whole segment that is both aligned with the sponsor and also kind of this its own mini section that's valuable to the listeners. And so that's
Yeah.
something that I could see working well here. And so it could be like, today's episode is sponsored by Dickles. Stay tuned for the middle of the episode where we're going to be discussing how to use this to make a, whatever kind of drink or exactly what
Hmm.
to pair it with and what kinds of circumstances to use it in. And so that could be
Hmm.
a way to both get the word out there and also lead into a more official segment of the show, which is even more valuable to the sponsors. It's also better for the listeners because it's just a useful thing in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And the other thing as a, first time listener is I'm not seeing a trailer episode. I
Mhm.
just switched over to Spotify. I'm seeing a lot of reviews in Spotify as well, 283.
Yeah.
So this show is winning the review game.
Yeah.
Very well done. But again, if you are going to have longer ads at the beginning of your show, the trailer episode is another nice, easy entry point for a potential listener. And I would just be going through these reviews and really getting a sense of what are listeners doing while they're listening to the show? How is this working its way into their lives? And then have the trailer set that tone. So, hey, I know you want to make nice drinks at home. Hey, I know you want to impress your house guests. Hey, I know you've had a hard week at work. Like, really kind of embody all of those different vibes from the reviews. And then a 1 minute trailer episode that doesn't have any ads gives people a way of getting into the show and knowing if it's for them.
Now, on that note, I scrolled down to the bottom of Spotify and there actually is a trailer episode, which is
Oh,
great. It just means that it has not been selected in the Spotify for Podcasters backend to be
mm,
featured, which is something that's an easy fix then. So I think we should listen through this. But before we do, I want to touch on something else related to the looking at the reviews. And this is something that a lot of times people will ask about: what day should I release my episodes on? And there is some data out there around, when people are most likely to listen to podcasts and things like that. And often it's like Monday to Thursday are the best days, people will say, or even Tuesday to Thursday. But I think there's another angle to this, which is basically what you were saying, is if you know when your listeners are listening to the show, and also like what experience do you want to create for them to some extent. And so they release on Thursdays, it looks like. And so
Mm.
that feels like a pretty good date to me. I would think Thursday, Friday are really good release dates for this type of show. And personally, I would probably even go with Friday. And I think that there's a difference in the type of show that you're doing as well. I think business
Mhm.
oriented shows probably should release Monday to Thursday, makes a lot of sense. But I think if you get
Yeah.
into more entertainment, or like this show is perfectly suited to weekend vibes, essentially. It's like, okay, you're getting ready for the weekend. And so a Friday morning listen to like, oh, okay, I'm going to have a new cocktail to like try tonight or over this weekend. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, Thursday can work really well for that as well. So a lot of times people want the hack of like, when will I get the most listeners, based on the day.
Yeah.
Maybe that applies to some extent, but I would expect that only really to make a difference when you're operating at a huge scale of like tens or hundreds of thousands of downloads an episode, where that begins to be noticeable. I think for small shows, I would think a lot more about like, what experience do I want to create? What environment do I expect my people to be in? As an example, I used to write a newsletter, Creative Wayfinding, that was more kind of like, it was about creativity and work and things like that and marketing to some extent, but it was much more philosophical than actionable. And so I intentionally sent it out every Sunday morning, because what I wanted to happen was people sit down, read through the newsletter with a cup of coffee. And what do you know? Many people actually did that. And I knew that this length of newsletter probably was not going to get people's attention in the midweek when they've got a lot going on. And so I said, Sunday, actually, there's some space. This is a more expansive type of newsletter. It's not highly actionable. I think that this fits into people's lives in this circumstance. And so I think thinking about
Mhm.
it in that way is more valuable than just thinking what day gets the most podcast downloads.
Absolutely.
So let's go back to that trailer. So we mentioned that it was at the bottom of the feed in Spotify, but was not showing up.
Yeah, so the reason it's not showing up is I've just looked at their RSS feed, and in podcasting, you can define whether an episode is a trailer or a full episode or a bonus episode. This trailer episode is currently marked as a full episode. And
Um,
so what I would do if I was them is go to your podcast hosting provider, and they should have a selector that looks like this, where you have normal, trailer, or bonus under episode type. In this case, for my podcast, this is marked as trailer. Any podcasting app like Spotify that supports that episode type will then feature it as a trailer episode. So normally on Spotify, that would show up here at the very, very top in that little trailer section.
so speaking of the trailer, should we take it for a test drive here?
Let's take it for a taste test. Yeah. 3, 2, 1.
Hey, this is Tim McCurdy, Senior Staff Writer at VinePair, and I'm dropping into your feed to tell you all about my new podcast, VinePair's Cocktail College. Now, I know, you know how to make an old-fashioned. You know your martinis from your Manhattans. But have you perfected those drinks? Do you know how the creme de la creme of American mixology approaches a Sazerac? That's what Cocktail College is all about. Here's how it's going down. Every week, we're going to approach a different classic cocktail with one of America's best bartenders, and we're going beyond the recipe. We're looking at things like base spirits, stirring and shaking techniques, glassware, ice, riffs. Whether you're just starting out on a professional bartending journey, or you're the one in your group of friends that everyone turns to and says, mix up the drinks, this show is going to be perfect for you. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and I'll see you listening next week, September 9th, for the first episode of Cocktail College.
All right. So thoughts on the trailer?
I can tell you the line that stuck out to me was whether you're a professional bartender or you're the person in your group of friends that everyone gets to mix the drinks. I think that right there was the one that hooked me personally.
Mhm.
It's like, is this show for me? Who's this show for? What's the feel? What's the vibe? And I also liked how he opened it up with a challenge. Like,
Mhm.
sure, you know how to make a old
Yeah.
fashioned or a Manhattan, but do you know this? Do you know this? Do you know this? It was like a little bit of challenge. And people who like drinks, they want to be doing it right. If there's something like snooty or, some secrets that they don't know yet, they want to do that because that's part of the job to be done with making drinks is
Yeah.
you're doing, all of these fancy things to impress your friends or impress the people sitting at the bar. So, yeah, overall, I liked it. Very professional. There's some music underneath to the point. It's a minute and 26 seconds long. So overall, I thought it was a good trailer.
I liked it as well. I like the saucy kind of scripting and dialogue going on there. So I
Hmm.
think that was really good. Gives you a good sense of the tone of what it's going to be. A couple things that I would potentially tweak. I think that the pacing felt a little bit slow of some of the editing. Like there's a little bit,
Mm,
maybe the gap between phrases or sentences was like 1 second long, and I would have liked it to be a little bit choppier and a little bit
mm,
more kind of momentum. And there was one section where it was like there's a bit of a 3 second gap where the music kind of came in. I think
mhm,
I would personally like that to just feel a little bit tighter. And then
mhm,
the other thing was that he mentioned the release date at the very end of the episode. And this is
mhm,
something that a lot of people will do because the teaser episode might be part of your kind of pre-launch marketing materials. And so it makes a lot of sense to have that. But usually what
mhm,
I do at this point is I might do 2 trailers. They're basically the identical script. And sometimes you just edit that kind of time sensitive date kind of call to action.
mhm,
But the thing that you have to, recognize is that people are going to be hopefully listening to this trailer for years into the future, as is the case with this show, which this trailer is now 3.5 years old or so at this point. And this brings up another sense that I get. And so even we listened to that ad in the most recent episode, and my sense already just from that 1 minute ad is that Tim's presentation here is tighter. The production's a little
mm,
bit better even. And so I would want to refresh this. You could probably keep almost the entire exact script and just work on the pacing a little bit, get it a little bit punchier. I think just like most podcast hosts build more charisma kind of and vocal control and inflection and all these things that actually do send a signal to people. So I think there's an
yeah,
opportunity to refresh this, add that trailer or teaser tag to the episode in the podcast feed, and have this be a really kind of valuable part of their kind of new listener acquisition and marketing going forward.
mhm, and one of the great things about podcasts as compared to YouTube is you can actually go in and you can replace the audio file. So,
Hmm.
you don't need to change anything else about this trailer. You can even keep the publish date the same if you want, but you can freshen it up, you can re-record it and drop in a new audio file. It'll get replaced in the feed. It'll propagate out to all of the different listening apps. And now you've got a better commercial for your show.
The other thing that, we thought the description was pretty good so far, but I think the one question that you had and that I also had was, is this for professional bartenders and mixologists, or is this for kind of everybody who wants to get better at making drinks? I would add
Mhm.
that sentence into the show description as well, because I think that that is something that will be a question on people's minds of like, is this going to be more of an insider industry thing that is going to be kind of too opaque for the average layperson? Or is this, a more kind of open show that is going to help everybody improve their mixology skills?
Mhm. That's a good point. The other thing as I scroll back up is we aren't seeing any custom episode art here in Spotify. And what could be a better opportunity for custom episode art than if you're talking about the mojito to have an image of the mojito? Again, now the challenge here is they've got this nice illustrated style in their cover art. Maybe to make that illustration for every drink might be difficult. I personally think that would be amazing if they could swing it. That would be awesome. But there might be a way to still stylistically, you know, give people a little prompt like, "Hey, we're talking about the mojito." People might be like, "What is a mojito? I can't remember." Am I even? Well, show them just like you would on a menu. Show them what the drink looks like.
I think you should click over to their website and scroll down on the page.
Okay.
And let's see what we see
Uh-huh.
there.
Oh, oh, there we go. They're doing it.
And they're
So,
just not applying it to the square version that goes in the episode artwork in Spotify.
yeah, so pretty straightforward in your podcast hosting provider. Often they'll have this section for optional episode artwork or custom episode artwork. Just drop the image that you've already created. You need to make it a square, but just add that if you're already doing the work. Make sure it's getting shown everywhere
Yeah.
in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. A lot of these places support custom episode art, and it's so great. Like you've already done it. Like just put
Yeah.
it in there, And again, it's another thing that just evokes the potential listener's interest
Hmm.
as they're scrolling through these, because the mode of the listener is like, what drink am I going to make tonight?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, I'm kind of feeling this like little reimagining classic cocktails with tequila. Yeah, I've got a bunch of tequila. Let's try this. So
Yep.
it's just another way to draw people in. Good catch there. They've already done the work to make these illustrations.
And I think the thing that I would do with these illustrations is I would personally remove all the text and just have the actual image.
Hmm.
And I don't think you need the text because the text is going to be in the podcast player or app. Or if you're
Yeah.
sharing it online, probably there's going to be some metadata that has the actual episode title. And I actually think it works a little bit better to have a bit of a curiosity gap if you see the image and then you're like, oh, what is that? And then you see the title and the dots kind of connect. And so
Hmm.
I like these. And, I'm looking at these. These feel like they could be posters or trading cards, some kind of collectibles. Like these are really well done illustrations. And I love the
Yeah.
vibe that they have. And yeah, I think these are great. And I would love to see these as the accompanying custom episode artwork for each and every episode.
Yeah. Anything else?
So as we go back to the listing, let's talk briefly through the titles here. And as I'm
Mhm.
looking through this, I see the first one, the Old Pal. Second one, Techniques, sugar and sweeteners. And then we've got the Daisy, reimagining classic cocktails with tequila, the Manhattan, the champagne cocktail, the Bijou, Flair bartending. What are your thoughts as you're kind of scrolling through some of these titles?
I personally think they're fine. If I'm looking for a podcast about making drinks and I just want to know, like, what am I going to get? And even if I didn't know what that particular drink was, the Old Pal is like, brings up curiosity on its own. So I think it works. Often we're telling people to add more to their titles, the actual show title and episode titles. And here it's just so nice to have a concept where short, simple titles works. So
Yeah.
I personally wouldn't change it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And I think, again, yeah, in this case, it's another example of the concept doing the heavy lifting. And once you've bought into the concept, the titles can be really simple and straightforward. And in this case, if we look at the Old Pal, even then in the description, obviously this doesn't show up in every single app, but we've got Rachel Kling, Diageo Hospitality Partnership National Educator, joins Cocktail College today to explore the Old Pal, an often overlooked relative of the Negroni and Boulevardier.
Hmm.
Boulevardier. I picked a tough one to pronounce here. My French is not to snuff. And so here we get that kind of bit of, if we don't know this cocktail, what is it related to? And we can kind of get a sense, oh, I would be interested in this, or I wouldn't be, or I'm just curious to learn anyway. So I
Hmm.
personally, in that description, I would move that an often overlooked relative of these other two drinks up to the first bit, probably, and
Hmm.
then move the guest back behind. But that's a,
Yeah.
minor kind of tweak here.
I also like this is such a great show concept because you've got the recipe right here, you've got the ingredients, you've got the directions. You could do all of this in the podcast app. And
Yep.
if people are, again, Friday night, it's like, okay, turn it on. The Old Pal, I got to get my ingredients together. All right. And then as they start to make the drink, I can just follow along with them. Just a really neat concept for an audio show.
Yeah. Overall, I think this show is doing a ton of stuff right here. Great concept. It just benefits from a simple title. The artwork's great. The episode titles are clear. We talked about maybe there's one sentence that could be added to the description, and the trailer episode was good. It potentially could benefit from a bit of a refresh, but it's by
Hmm.
no means bad. So yeah, tons to like about the show. Obviously, they're getting a ton of ratings and reviews in both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So anything else that you would leave them with that they could maybe work on or improve?
If we want to get super geeky about the marketing stuff, I just pulled up their website in a keyword tracker. So tracks how people are finding their website on Google. Shows you the power of a great concept because their top searches are all the names of drinks. So we're just seeing lots and lots of different drink types here, and they are ranking for a lot of these. So just shows you that if you've got a show that lends itself to this, it's another reason even to have a website, because then you can have, for each of these drinks, they've got a landing page for that episode that talks about the episode. You can play the episode, and then it has the directions and the ingredients on the website as well. So yeah, good show concept, and it really lends itself to searching on Google and maybe finding your podcast.
So thanks to Tim for submitting the show. If you are listening and would like to have your podcast have the potential to be roasted by us, you can leave a review for our show, Podcast Marketing Trends Explained in Apple Podcasts, and just leave the name of your show and we will submit it to the hat and potentially submit your show to the skewer in a future episode.